The clerk slid my paperwork back across the counter without even looking up. "You're missing a co-signer," she said. Again. I'd been standing at that counter for 40 minutes. The fluorescent lights in the Service Ontario office on Wellington Street hummed at a frequency I was pretty sure was designed to make people give up and go home. I had not given up. I had, however, been crying quietly in the parking lot for 20 minutes before walking in, so I wasn't exactly at my best. His name was Ryan. We'd been together for 3 years. He was supposed to meet me here at 2 o'clock to co-sign the mortgage paperwork. The final step before the house in Waterloo was ours. I texted him at 2:15. At 2:30. At 2:35. By 3, I'd called his mother, who told me in a voice so careful it made my stomach drop, that she thought he'd gone to visit a friend in Guelph. A friend. I knew what that meant. I think I'd known for a while. The clerk, her name tag said Bonnie, finally looked up at me. She had the eyes of someone who had seen every possible variety of human disaster walk through that door, and she was not surprised by any of it. "Is there someone else who can co-sign?" she asked. "No," I said, "there's not." She made a small sound, not unkind, just tired. She glanced past me at the waiting area, a row of plastic chairs bolted to the wall, most of them occupied by people filling out forms and staring at their phones. Then something shifted in her expression. "That man over there," she said, lowering her voice. She tilted her head almost imperceptibly toward the far end of the row. "He's been here since noon. Waiting for someone who's not coming, by the look of it." She paused. "Just an observation." I turned. He was sitting with his forearms on his knees, a folder of papers dangling from one hand, staring at the floor. Dark coat. Maybe 30, 32. The particular stillness of someone who is trying very hard not to feel whatever they're feeling. I turned back to Bonnie. "Are you suggesting I ask a stranger to co-sign my mortgage?" I said. She shrugged one shoulder. "I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying he looks like he could use a coffee. There's a Tim Hortons across the street." She picked up her pen. "I'll hold your file until 4:30. I don't know what possessed me. 3 years of carefully measured decisions, the right job, the right neighborhood, the responsible choice every single time, and Ryan had still stood me up on the most important afternoon of my adult life. Something in me was just done being careful." I walked over and sat down next to the stranger. "Whoever was supposed to meet you isn't coming, are they?" I said. It wasn't really a question. He looked up. He had very tired eyes. "No," he said. "She's not." "Same," I said. "Mine either." We sat there for a moment. "I'm Ivy," I said. "Bennett," he said. "The woman at the counter suggested we get coffee," I said. "I think she felt sorry for us." He laughed, short, surprised, like he'd forgotten he knew how. "That's either the saddest thing I've heard today or the best." We went across the street. He told me over 2 large Timmies and a box of Timbits neither of us really wanted but kept eating anyway, that he'd been engaged. 8 months. His fiancée, he didn't say her name, just she, had called him that morning to say she wasn't going to make it to their appointment with the mortgage broker. That she'd been thinking. That she needed space. That she was sorry. 8 months. And she'd ended it over the phone 45 minutes before the appointment. "She kept the ring," he said, and then looked like he wished he hadn't said it. "Ryan took my access to our joint savings account this morning," I said. "I didn't notice until I was already on the highway." Bennett stared at me. "He what?" "I know." He stopped. "I'm sorry. That's awful." "It's fine," I said, which was obviously a lie. "It's not fine," he said, which was the right answer. We sat there a little longer. Outside, it had started to snow. That thin, annoying early November snow that doesn't stick but gets in your eyes. The Tim Hortons was warm and smelled like coffee, and the specific sadness of 2 people whose entire afternoon plans had just collapsed. "What happens to the house?" he asked. "I lose the deposit if I don't close by Friday," I said. $12,000. "I'm a contractor," he said. "I was supposed to close on a commercial property today. My former business partner, had the co-signature on the operating loan. She backed out, takes the loan with her." "So you lose." "The contract, the equipment deposit, probably the crew I'd lined up." He rubbed the back of his neck. 6 years of building that company? I looked at him across the table. He looked at me. We were two completely ruined strangers in a Tim Hortons, and the snow was getting worse. "Bonnie is holding my file until 4:30, I said. "It's 4:03, he said. "I know." "What exactly are you saying?" he asked slowly. I wasn't entirely sure, but the deposit was $12,000, and I'd spent 3 years being sensible, and it had gotten me precisely nowhere. "I'm saying I don't know you," I said, "but you seem like someone with a working credit score and no obvious reason to steal my house." He blinked. Then he said, "I have a 780 credit score, and I've never had so much as a parking ticket." "I have a 792, and I've been pre-approved," I said. Another silence. "This is insane," he said. "Yes," I agreed. He picked up a Timbit, set it down. "Do you have the paperwork with you?" I held up my folder. We were back at the counter by 4:17. Bonnie looked at both of us, then at the paperwork, then back at us. "Well," she said, and the corner of her mouth did something that might have been a smile. "Let's get this sorted. We did not fall in love at the Service Ontario office on Wellington Street. I want to be clear about that. What we did was save each other from an extremely expensive afternoon. We signed the papers, shook hands like reasonable adults, and exchanged phone numbers because the lawyer would need to reach us both before Friday's closing. He texted me that evening to confirm he'd received the email from my lawyer. I texted back, "Lawyer confirmed. Thank you again, truly." He wrote, "No thank you, I needed to do something that made sense today." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just sent a thumbs up emoji, which I immediately regretted because it seemed very impersonal for someone who had just co-signed a mortgage with me. He sent back a thumbs up emoji too. The house closed on Friday. Bennett showed up at the lawyer's office in a better coat than the one from the Service Ontario waiting room, and he looked like he'd slept, which was more than I could say for myself. We sat across the table from each other and signed our names approximately 40 times, and then it was done, and I owned a house with a man I'd met 4 days ago. "So," he said, on the front steps of the lawyer's building, pulling on his gloves, "what now?" "Now I move in," I said, "and in about 10 years I can buy you out of your half at market value, or we list it and split the equity." "Right," he said. "Right," he paused. Or, I said. "I could help you move," he said. "I have a truck." He did in fact have a truck, a Ford F-150, which in Canada is basically proof that a person is functional and owns furniture. "You don't have to," I said. "I know," he said, "but I just lost a construction contract and I have 2 free weeks and I'm very good at moving furniture." I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. "Saturday," I said, 9 o'clock. He showed up at 8:50 with coffee. The thing about spending a Saturday moving boxes with someone is that you learn things about them you wouldn't learn any other way. You learn whether they complain. You learn whether they actually help, or whether they stand holding one end of a couch while you do all the work. You learn whether they make fun of your collection of secondhand cookbooks. He didn't. Or your inexplicable box of rocks from various beaches. Also didn't. You learn that they grew up in Hamilton, that their dad was an electrician, that they started their construction company with their college roommate, who eventually sold her half to someone else, and that the new business partner had been the one who backed out of the mortgage. "So your ex-fiancé and your business partner are different people," I said, balancing a lamp. "Yes," he said. "So you had 2 catastrophic betrayals in the same week." He thought about it. "When you say it like that, it sounds worse." It is worse, I said. That's terrible. Thank you for saying so, he said. My brother keeps telling me everything happens for a reason. Does that help? No, he said. Not even slightly. Same, I said. We order pizza at 7. He knew enough not to suggest pineapple. We sat on the floor because I hadn't assembled the furniture yet, and we ate directly from the box, and I thought, this is strange. This is a very strange situation. But strange wasn't the same as bad. He came back the next weekend to help me assemble the IKEA shelving unit I'd bought and immediately regretted. This was not planned. I called him because the instructions had a step that clearly required 4 hands and my best friend was in Kelowna visiting family. You know you could just hire someone, he said on the phone. You're a contractor, I said. This is basically your natural habitat. He laughed. He came over. He also fixed the loose railing on the back deck without being asked, because apparently he noticed it while he was there and couldn't just leave it. I made pasta. He stayed for dinner. This became, gradually and without any formal agreement, a pattern. I wasn't looking for anything. I wasn't ready. Ryan had gutted something in me. Not the dramatic kind of gutting, but the slow, quiet kind where you realize you spent 3 years adjusting yourself around someone who was never fully there. I'd been so busy trying to be low maintenance, easy, undemanding, that I hadn't noticed I was also being invisible. Then it didn't require me to be invisible. He asked my opinion and then actually listened to it. He remembered things, that I took my coffee with oat milk, that I hated the sound of TV in the background, that my mother's birthday was in March and I needed to call her. He didn't make a performance of remembering, he just did it. I noticed. I tried not to make too much of it. It was February when Ryan resurfaced. I'd known he would eventually. Men like Ryan always do. Once enough time has passed for them to feel like the wound they caused has probably healed and they can approach without guilt. He showed up at my door on a Tuesday evening. I hadn't given him my new address, which meant he'd gotten it from somewhere, which I immediately noted as a violation of a boundary I thought was obvious. I miss you, he said. He was holding flowers. Not nice flowers. The gas station kind, still in their plastic sleeve. Okay, I said. I made a mistake, he said. Several, I said. He looked wounded, which I found interesting since he was the one who had cleared out our joint savings account. I've been thinking about you, he said. About us. There isn't an us, I said. There hasn't been for 3 months. Ivy. You took $12,000 from me, I said. You didn't show up to the biggest appointment of my life. And then you disappeared. And now you're here with gas station flowers. I can pay you back, he said. I'm getting back on my feet. I don't want you to pay me back, I said, and I realized as I said it that it was true. I want you to go. He stood there. I watched something flicker in his expression. A recalculation. The moment someone realizes the approach isn't working and tries to find a new angle. Is there someone else? He said. That's not the point, I said. Ivy. Good night, Ryan. I closed the door. I stood in my hallway, in my house, and I breathed. The house was quiet. It smelled like whatever I'd had for dinner and the cedar candle my mother had sent for Christmas. I texted Bennett. He just showed up at the door. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Then are you okay? Me, yes, I told him to leave. Bennett, good. Do you want company or do you want to be alone? I stood there in the hallway looking at my phone. Me company, I think, if that's okay. He was there in 20 minutes with a 6-pack of Mill Street Organic and absolutely 0 questions about Ryan, which was exactly right. We watched half of a hockey game I didn't care about, and he explained the icing rule twice and I forgot it both times, and somewhere around the 3rd period I fell asleep on the couch and woke up to find he'd put a blanket over me and left a note on the coffee table. Lock your door. Top tomorrow. I'd been at the house about 6 months when I found out about the money. Not Ryan's money, something older than that. My father. I haven't mentioned my father. He and my mother divorced when I was 11 and he moved out west, and we had the kind of relationship that exists primarily through birthday texts and the occasional awkward phone call where neither of us says the thing we actually mean. I hadn't seen him in 4 years. His lawyer called me on a Wednesday morning while I was in the middle of a meeting. I called back on my lunch break, sitting in my car in the parking garage, eating a sandwich I wasn't hungry for. My father was sick, had been sick for over a year. He hadn't told me. The lawyer explained the situation carefully and in the tone of someone who has given this kind of news many times. My father had a property in Canmore, Alberta, a house he bought in the 90s that had appreciated in the way Canmore properties do, which is to say aggressively. And he was putting his affairs in order and wanted me to be on the deed. He wants me to have the house, I said. He wants you to have the option, the lawyer said. He thought you might want to come and see him before decisions need to be made. I sat in the parking garage for a long time after I hung up. I hadn't told anyone about my father's health. It was the kind of information that sits in you strangely, too large to share casually, too raw to know what to do with. I told Bennett that evening because he was there and because I'd run out of space to carry things alone. He listened without interrupting. He didn't tell me everything happened for a reason. He didn't suggest silver linings. "Do you want to go see him?" he said. "I don't know," I said. It's complicated." "It usually is," he said. "He didn't tell me he was sick," I said. "For over a year." "I know." That's a long time to decide. I didn't need to know." "Yes," he said, "it is." I appreciated that he didn't argue me out of it, didn't tell me I'd regret it if I didn't go, or that my father probably had his reasons, or any of the other things people say when they're uncomfortable with someone else's pain and want to resolve it quickly. He just sat with me in it. I went to Canmore in April. My father was smaller than I remembered. That sounds simple, but it wasn't. The particular shock of seeing a parent diminished is something I hadn't been prepared for, even having been warned. He was in a house full of Alberta light, the Rockies visible from every window, and he looked like himself but quieter, like someone had turned the volume down slightly on everything. We talked for 3 days. Some of it was practical, the house, the deed, the decisions that needed to be made. But some of it was other things, old things, things that had been sitting between us for years, like furniture nobody wanted to move. He told me he left not because of me, but because of his own failures, which he named specifically, which I hadn't expected. He didn't ask me to forgive him. He said he wasn't sure he'd earned that and he wasn't going to ask for it. He just wanted me to know. I cried in the rental car afterward for a long time, in a Tim Hortons parking lot in Canmore, because apparently Tim Hortons parking lots were becoming a theme in my life. I called Bennett from there. "How are you doing?" he said. "I don't know," I said. "Better than I expected, worse than I hoped." "That sounds about right," he said. "He's not who I thought he was," I said. "He's worse in some ways and better in others." "Most people are," Bennett said. I thought about Ryan, who had turned out to be worse in most ways and better in none. I thought about Bennett, who had been consistently better than expected since the moment he looked up from his paperwork in a plastic chair and confirmed that no, she wasn't coming. "I'll miss you all Friday," I said. "I'll pick you up," he said. "What time?" "You don't have to," I said. "Pearson's a nightmare on Friday afternoons," he said. "You'll be waiting an hour for a rideshare. I'll pick you up. Text me your flight." He was there when I came through the arrivals doors with my bag, leaning against a pillar with his coat open, because the terminal was too warm. And when he saw me, something happened to his face. A kind of relief that was slightly more than just glad a friend is home, and I noticed it. And I think he noticed that I noticed, and we stood there for a second too long. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he said. "How was the flight?" "Fine," I said. There was a baby in the row behind me. "Brutal," he said, and took my bag before I could stop him, and we walked to the car. It was a Saturday in June when everything finally shifted. We were in my backyard. I'd bought a small gas barbecue, my first one, because for 3 years Ryan had insisted barbecues were too much hassle, and I'd accepted this even though I'd always wanted one. And Bennett was showing me how to not ruin chicken, which apparently I'd been doing wrong my whole life. "You have to let it go," he said. "Stop moving it around." "I like to check on it," I said. "You're disturbing the sear," he said. "I don't know what that means." "It means leave it alone," he said. "Trust the process." "That's rich advice from someone who rebuilt his business from scratch in 6 months," I said. He looked over at me. He'd done exactly that. Found 2 new investors, rebuilt the crew, taken on a mid-sized commercial project in Cambridge. He didn't talk about it much, which I come to understand was not modesty but just the way he processed things, quietly, internally, without requiring an audience. "The chicken," he said. "The chicken?" I agreed. We ate outside. It was warm, that specific warm of a southern Ontario June evening where it's still light at 8:30, and the air smells like someone 3 houses over is also barbecuing. My neighbor's dog was barking at something invisible. Down the street, a kid was riding a bike. "I want to tell you something," Bennett said. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at his plate. "And I want to say it before I think about it too much, because if I think about it too much, I won't say it." "Okay," I said. "I know the way this started is strange," he said, "and I'm not trying to make it strange again. But I've been sitting in this yard with you on weeknights eating takeout and watching bad television and helping you figure out what's wrong with your water pressure. And," he finally looked up, "I don't want to do that with anyone else. I want to do it here, with you." I set down my fork. "Bennett," I said. "You don't have to say anything back," he said quickly. I needed to say it." "I'm trying to say something back," I said. "If you'd let me." He went quiet. "I spent 3 years making myself smaller so Ryan would feel comfortable," I said. "I didn't even notice I was doing it. And then I met you in the worst way possible, in the most ridiculous circumstances, and you've never once made me feel like I needed to take up less space. And that's—" I stopped. "That's not nothing." "No," he said, "it's not." "I'm scared," I said. "I want you to know that. I'm still scared." "Me too," he said. "Okay," I said. "Then we're both scared." "Yeah," he said. "That's manageable," I said. He reached across the table and covered my hand with his. We sat like that while the sun went down over the rooftops of Waterloo, Ontario, in the backyard of a house that had started as an act of mutual desperation and had become, somehow, a home. My father came to visit in September. He flew in from Calgary. Flying was hard for him now, but he made it, and he stayed in the spare room I'd actually bothered to furnish by then. He and Bennett met over dinner. The 4 of us, me, my father, Bennett, and my mother, on FaceTime because she lived in Ottawa and couldn't make it, but absolutely was not going to miss the occasion. My father watched Bennett refill my water without being asked and listened while he and my mother discussed, with great seriousness, the correct way to make butter tarts. He didn't say anything about it until the next morning, when I found him in the kitchen making tea. "He's a careful man," my father said. "Yes," I said. "Good careful," he said. "Not careful like he's hiding things." "I know the difference," I said. "Now." He nodded. He looked out the window at the backyard, at the barbecue, at the garden I'd been badly attempting since June. "You did well," he said, "with all of this." He didn't mean the garden. "I had help," I said. He put his hand on my shoulder briefly, The way someone does when words are not sufficient, but they want you to know they were there. And I thought about Bonnie at the Service Ontario counter, tilting her head toward a stranger in a waiting room. About Bennett looking up from his paperwork with those tired eyes. About how the worst afternoon of my adult life had turned, slowly and improbably, into the best year. There's no neat way to explain that to anyone. You had to have been there. You had to have been sitting in that chair. I think about Bonnie a lot. A woman behind a government counter in a fluorescent-lit office, holding my file, tilting her head toward a stranger who was also just sitting there holding his. She didn't fix anything for me. She just pointed, and somehow that was enough. The life I have now didn't come from making the right choice. It came from refusing to make the wrong one twice. Ryan taught me that. Not intentionally, not kindly, but thoroughly. When you spend years adjusting yourself around someone who never fully shows up, you stop noticing the adjustments. You just get smaller and smaller until one day you're standing at a counter with a folder of paperwork and no one on the other end of the phone, and you finally understand that the problem was never the paperwork. What I've come to believe is that how we respond to being wronged matters more than the wrong itself. I could have taken Ryan's disappearance and let it teach me that people aren't worth trusting. That would have been the easy lesson. Instead, I walked across the street to a Tim Hortons with a stranger, and I chose, deliberately, even if it didn't feel deliberate at the time, to try again. That choice came from something I didn't have a word for then. I'd call it integrity now. Not the formal kind, just the quiet decision to keep being the person I wanted to be, even when someone had given me every reason not to. Bennett didn't save me. I want to be clear about that. He showed up with coffee and a truck and fixed a railing without being asked. And what that did was remind me that good judgment is a skill, not a luck. I had been using mine poorly for 3 years. Once I stopped, things became clearer. I could see who was careful and who was careless. I could tell the difference between a man who remembered how I took my coffee and a man who couldn't remember to show up. My father's visit taught me the other part. That intelligence, real intelligence, the kind that actually helps you live, isn't just knowing things. It's knowing when you were wrong and saying so specifically, without asking to be forgiven for it. He named his failures out loud. That took more clarity than I'd given him credit for. And it changed something between us that I hadn't believed could change. The hardest part of this whole year wasn't the money Ryan took, or the closing deadline, or even going to Canmore to sit with a father I barely knew. The hardest part was deciding, over and over, not to give up on the version of myself that still believed good things were possible. That's not stubbornness. It's something quieter than that. The kind of persistence that doesn't announce itself, that just keeps going to Tim Hortons and eating Timbits and signing paperwork and trusting that the next person you meet in a waiting room might just be exactly who you needed to find. Bonnie held my file until 4:30. I made it back by 4:17. I think about that margin a lot too.